All right, so thank you guys for joining our conversation today. September has been Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, where we have been on the forefront as Hisia Psychology Consultants, basically to advocate for the criminalization of the suicide attempt, because under Penal Code 226, it is a criminal offense for a period of not less than 2 years. But research indicates that, by the time someone is getting to the point of wanting to commit suicide, it is as a result of mental health challenges. So we are asking the government to reconsider that. And of course, there has been so many other people who have played part in this. We were not the people who initiated the movement, but we joined the movement to decriminalize suicide. And we have talked about suicide prevention and how you can be the light or the support to someone close to you, and how you can tell they are struggling with mental health challenges. So today we are focusing on someone who has lost a loved one, or who has come close to losing a loved one. So my name is Nancy Kabiru from Hisia Psychology Consultants, and I'll be having a colleague of mine by the name Kenneth Karaoke, who will be joining the conversation as well and take you through what we have prepared. We have a large team, as you can see on your screen there. We have a team of dedicated psychologists and psychiatrists, life coaches, and clinical hypnotherapists to help you address mental health issues or mental health challenges, as well as manage your mental health. Because without the knowledge of how to maintain wellness, mental wellness, then you have a challenge with managing your everyday life or even enjoying that. So mental health, everything begins from your cognitive abilities. So how can we ensure that what you're receiving, what you're perceiving, translates positively to your behavior, to your emotions? And when you start feeling negative, then that means there is a challenge, and that's when you come to us. So we can move on. So yes, so Nancy will be presenting, and Kenneth, and I will take you right on to our first conversation, which is on overcoming grief, right? Because we all want to have fun. We want to enjoy life. We want to have all the positive experiences, but nobody teaches us how to handle negative experiences. And grief becomes one of the most heaviest of the emotions when you have gone through loss. The thing that I want all of us to understand is that a grief can be caused by any form of loss. So loss of your job, loss of a loved one, loss of a personal property, something that you are invested in, loss of friendship, loss of a child, loss of a relationship, right? All these things can cause grief. But how do you get past grief that is caused by someone who has committed suicide, right? Someone who has taken their life through suicide? How do you overcome this? So the first thing that we all need to note here is that grief is for you to process grief, you have to go through the mourning process, okay? And mourning is a very emotionally intense process that is natural and inevitable. So you will feel some sort of heaviness, some sort of darkness, a way that you cannot be able to elaborate or explain what you're going through. You will go through guilt, you will go through anxiety. Sometimes you may even start justifying or making reason why that death has happened in that particular manner. There will be blame, right? Either blame that you assign yourself or blame that you assign someone close to you or something or some sort of situation. And all this myriad of emotion is aimed at you being able to process. The reason why your body or your mind reacts this way, it's because it's going through the shock and trying to make meaning of everything that is going on. So when you find yourself in this situation, do not block those emotions, right? I would like you to find a safe place with which you can be able to express yourself You can do this by either writing down, noting the emotions you're going through, so that you take it out of your mind and out of your heart onto a piece of paper, and in a way that you can at least try and consume it from a third eye perspective rather than directly. Because when you keep it inside, it only will wear you out. Why? It triggers your brain to go into a protective mode. So the chemicals that are produced within your mind, or the hormones that are produced within your body, becomes reactive. And that's why you find people saying that they are having stomach aches, they're having headaches, they're having some sort of tension within their body, because they are holding the emotion. They are unable to process it. And we find a lot of men having challenges with expressing this. So you find them going to sit in the men baraza. Some will consume alcohol, right? And whenever someone is going through some sort of difficult situation, there is a tendency to project. So there would be anger, right? And when you have this anger, be mindful of your environment, because for every loss or for every death, 5 other people are affected. So needless to say, when we have a death by suicide, then we have more than 5 people that have been affected by that death. So it's good to also be mindful of everyone else who is around. So learn to process the mourning or the process. However, also be mindful of people who are around you. Also note that distinguishing between the death that is by suicide is difficult, because there is the perceived intentionality of the person who took their life. So you will want to make meaning, understand why or what was their process, their mind process towards the point that they took their life. So this is a common thing. And you may find families, relatives falling apart because they cannot seem to agree, or someone is so convinced that they know why someone else took their life. And this ends up putting people in a strenuous relationship. So what we are trying to tell you today is, when you're trying to make sense of what happened, or why that death took its place in that particular manner, realize that it was this person's choice, okay? And they intended to do that because they were at more mental agony. Sometimes they want to get out of the pain that they are going through, not end their life. So it is that part of the pain that they are trying to overcome, but they lack the resources or the skills or the support or the tools to be able to manage that. And that is why we need to get to understand, when this happens, how do we process the emotions? Or when you notice certain signs and symptoms, how can you support someone else, or someone you know who has had, a loss of a relative, of a friend through suicide? How can you be of support? Maybe because we end up being very judgmental, speaking our mind without processing the pain you're going through, or what that other person is going through. So an important thing to note is that as we go through this process, there is no quick fix to any of these issues, right? There is no quick fix. So you have to process the emotion, and it will take time. A normal grief cycle has about 6 stages. So you will go through anger, you will go through the depression, you go through justification, you go through acceptance, you go through shock, you will go through justification. So it is a process that you go through, and it is a cycle which can eliminate some of the stages or keep all the stages. And for someone to say that they have fully healed from pain of loss, it takes them about 2 years. And what happens is that the shock or the loss remains the same for you as an individual, but the ability or capacity to handle that pain, continues to grow. So the problem seems smaller, because your capacity has grown. And that's what our aim today is about, to help you grow your capacity when you're handling such things which only life can bring, because we grow up in a protected environment where we are not able to address all this. So what is suicide bereavement? We find the explanation for this is that it is the pain brought about by death by suicide. Okay, and it has different ways that it manifests itself, and different ways that every individual tries to process. So you may find yourself having a greater need to seek an explanation for the death. Okay, so this could be you. This could be a friend. This could be your family member. This could be, anyone who knew the bereaved or who knew the person who is now gone, right? Will want to find an explanation. Sometimes these explanations could lead to growth for you as an individual for areas that probably have been neglected or are not considered important, especially if the person who is no longer alive has left a note or the reasons for them taking their life. So that provides, a journey or a bridge to cross through this pain process. The survivors will experience greater level of guilt and feel responsible for the death. Yes, because you are among the 5 people who are affected by this loss. Okay, so you will experience some sort of guilt. You will ask yourself, how did you miss these things? But if you brood over and over and over, remember, it takes only 2 weeks for you to be diagnosed with depression. If you have challenges with sleep, if you have challenges with eating, if you have no motivation for living or to do what you need to do on an everyday life, if you start isolating, okay, and if you're experiencing any psychosomatic pain, that would be headache, stomachache, right? So it only takes 2 weeks for a diagnosis of depression, for you to be diagnosed with depression. That being the case, if you are looking for a reason, or if you're experiencing guilt and this makes you isolate for more than 2 weeks, then it is also going to affect you as an individual. And that was not the intention of the death. The intention is so that you can understand what the challenge was, what the areas probably you have missed or someone else has missed, and find a way of communicating, because there's no one who can exist in isolation. The third thing would be stigmatization and shame brought by this mode of death. This is very, 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 very common in our African society. Okay, we stigmatize mental health, right? So we find a lot of people being shy to even seek psychological support because they do not want to be labeled. Or if you get a diagnosis, you're not able to share what you're living with, the condition you're living with, because you're afraid you will be seen as, disabled in some sort of way. So this stigma equally translates when you have someone in a family situation, in a village, in a work environment, having taken their life. So you find people going through a lot of stigma. And the stigma is based on other people's perception of you or the reason why. And we want to keep away from that stigma. That makes us not process the pain we are handling that. So that stigma or the shame of the family will go through. And that's something that you need to heal, because when you're going through stigma or you're going through shame, then your self-esteem, your identity is also affected. Okay, so you do not know how to relate with yourself or to relate with your environment. If you find yourself in this kind of situation, there are so many other strengths that you can be able to bring out. However, the pain of the problem can make you feel that you only have one way, unilateral way of looking at situation. So you may end up using more of your cognitive abilities and limiting your emotional abilities. And that is where we come in as mental health practitioners, to help build on your emotional abilities. Or if, say, your cognitive abilities is suppressed and your emotional abilities is what is heightened, help you to bring a balance that is logical and can help you manage your life. Then you find that the survivors will receive a lot of avoidance in social support. Yes, there is a lot of that. And even that has been addressed where you find, say, a burial rites, which we normally conduct as Africans. You find there are not so many churches that would be willing to bury the person who took their life. So the family is left in a quagmire, in the sense that what do we do? Do we now hire someone who we have no relationship with to conduct this burial rites, or how do we go about it? So this lack of social support affects more those who are left behind. And everyone has a strength and has a role to play in the society. So if we were only to look beyond the challenge someone is experiencing at that particular time, then you would enhance your support structure. There's always that nyumba kumi thing. Every nyumba has its strength. So if you overlook one because it has had a challenge, then you're making yourself incapable in the long run. Then we have where someone has exposure to the loss of the loved one, to suicide. They have increased chances of suicidal thinking and behavior. Yes, and this is very true for those who are usually the first respondent to the site. So if you happen to witness how this relative, this friend took their life, and if you found them in that state before they were taken to the morgue, there is a greater tendency for you as an individual to start thinking of ending your life, or to try and get to a point where you lack meaning for life, or lack purpose for life. If somebody can end or take their life, what would have led them to that? So suicide prevention, we need to look at what are the reasons or the elements that leads to this person going to that. So the element that makes suicide distinct from others form of bereavement is the perceived intentionality of death. I mentioned that earlier. Yes, it's different because the individual did not go through an accident. Their life was not taken by someone. They did not die of a natural cause, which we have normalized as a way of, dying. But they intended and they went through the measures or the process or the stages to take their own life. So there's even anger that lies within an individual towards the person who is departed. So you have that. And then the second thing would be the mourners are left asking the questions, why did they choose to do this to themselves and to us? So you start feeling like they did not love you enough. They did not cherish you. They did not take you important. They didn't seek support from you. And if they did, you probably would have had the chance to save them. And this is a process of justification and going through the guilt. So if you find yourself going through this, it's very, very okay. But remember, it's good to get those thoughts out of your mind, out of your heart, into a piece of paper, into an audio, record it on your phone. We will show you later, if you ever come for therapy, how to discard those emotions, but do not let them sit within you. You have questions of accountability where you ask what the circumstances or conditions that led this person to commit suicide. And if they left the note and say they did it because of someone, you find that there's a lot of anger directed towards that person. There's a lot of victimization that is directed towards that person, which is not a fair thing per se, because everyone should be equipped to make their own choices and to accept the situation they are in, and to also know how to live within their abilities. So if they point out towards someone, it could be an area of improvement, but can we support that person from an understanding perspective rather than a blame perspective, right? Let's move on. So there are several tasks that are assigned to the psychological integration of the loss, okay? And the first stage being you as an individual being able to contain the trauma. because there is when you receive this news, what goes through your mind is that your mind gets traumatized, your emotions get traumatized. If you happen to witness this death, if you happen to have known but you didn't take it seriously, you obviously will go through trauma within your emotion. So the first stage is to be able to contain the trauma. The second one would be to repair the mourner's assumptive world, because at this point, the world stopped existing how you know it. And because you're going through the cycle of grief, your world may be impaired. You may feel helpless. You may feel alone. Then you may find people who will doze, right? They are dozing because they are trying to treat the pain. And they're trying to treat the pain by way of taking medication, by way of taking substances. And, that's not helpful. So you need to learn, how do you self-dose in a helpful way? What self-care do you need to take? What are the measures or the things you need to introduce to your environment? What do you want to symbolize the life or the impact the person who is departed left to your life? Do you want to maybe plant a tree, a flower? Do you want to create something symbolic, right? How do you want to be remembering them? And this helps you to now stop obsessing with the loss. Then being able to develop social management skills. Social management would happen when you're not isolated, when you're not going through stigma, and when you're not being avoided. So there is obviously groups of people who will be available or willing to support you. And if you don't have that, what are the areas beyond you that can provide support, even away from your environment? Or how can you volunteer to communicate what you have learned through this process to your environment? The fifth big thing would be repairing relationship with the deceased. As I say, there will be anger directed to this, the departed soul, because of their choice to take their life. So how can you repair that, even as much as they don't have the chance to explain themselves to you or to help you make meaning of their choice? How can you repair? Were there positive experiences that you did have with this person? What were they known for? Or what did they aim to do? Did they have a cause, a greater cause beyond themselves, right? Did you know whether they were suffering a mental illness? Were they diagnosed with a terminal illness? Or were they going through a financial crisis? Because by observing them, then you can be able to learn what to adjust and how you can repair and what they would have wished, so that you save yourself from going back down that tumbling block, or you try and be a pillar to the 5 people who have been affected. Then we have development of durable biography of the deceased, which is a helpful thing. It is very, very therapeutic to put their images, their wishes, their thoughts, some of their statements they used to say that made life bearable or that made you have meaning for life, because it could be an impact to the society. So I lost my brother through suicide. And one of the things that we did, we created a biography for him, because this now, the son he left behind has a chance to understand his father better when he's out of this world, because he didn't have the chance to do that. So when you create this, you enable other people to understand the departed soul better. Then there is investment or reinvestment in living. Understanding what your purpose is in life, right? What makes you want to live? What makes you desire to be productive? What keeps you going? When you understand this, then you separate yourself from the loss. You're able to separate yourself from the loss. And you're able to be meaningful, you're able to be useful, you're able to live a fulfilled life without having a reinvestment in living. Remember, if your self-esteem is injured or your identity is injured, even your productivity is affected. If you go through the depression cycle and you actually get diagnosed with depression, even your physical health gets affected, because a lot of emotions sit within your chest area. So you find yourself having heart challenges. You find yourself having digestive issues. You find yourself having headaches that are, or yes, headaches that cannot be, even when you take medication, they are not able to, you're not able to stay for a long time without getting it again and again and again, meaning your physical health has been affected by this loss. So if you don't reinvest in living, then you will have a challenge going forward, and you will have a challenge being within these 5 people who are affected. So what we want you to do is be able to, 1, live healthily, 2, enjoy life, 3, acknowledge the loss that has happened, 4, move beyond that loss, and 5, be able to talk freely of your experiences. Because when you can talk freely, the trauma ceases, or the weight of the trauma ceases. So that will be what I had for you. And I want to pose a question at this moment to ask you, what has your experience with loss or death by suicide been? Okay, maybe you can engage us on chat about that. Do you know of somebody who has had loss by suicide, and how have you stepped in for them? And do you feel that through this webinar, you will be able to gain skills to support someone else? So thank you so much, and I'll ask Kenneth to carry on. Asante. Kenneth, you're muted.
So, okay. Thank you very much, Nancy, for your good presentation and a lot of learning. We also want to thank you for bringing your own experience into this and making it more alive, because of giving a life experience that you have. Thank you so much. All right. So what I would like to do is to go through what Nancy has explained to us. We say the 7 tasks that you have to go through. We also call them the 7 grief works, okay, or mourning works that somebody has to do when they are undergoing grief due to death caused by suicide. So what we are saying is that in all this, there is a lot of work, a lot of emotional work that has to go through. If we go to the first one, the first one, which you are saying is containment of trauma and restoration of a sense of psychological safety and control. Now, whenever somebody goes through a traumatic experience, especially due to death, you have what we call symptoms of trauma, or it simply traumatizes you. And as a survivor, you go through a lot of trauma experience, or as someone close has passed on due to suicide, you have got what we call trauma symptoms that you might have. Some of the trauma symptoms would include intrusivity, or what we call intrusive thoughts. All right. Now, intrusive thoughts are thoughts that come without your control. Okay. Or thoughts that, sometimes you're just doing something and then a certain thought comes, or a certain image comes to you. And that is what we call intrusivity, or being intrusive. Some might be also visual, okay? So you might have some visual images about that experience, okay? Those visual images is what we also call autogenic experiences, just meaning that you can see yourself there. Especially, for example, if you saw this person having committed the suicide, you went and you witnessed them, maybe you saw the body or something like that. So that autogenic experience will come from time to time. The other important thing to notice is that for you to have these visions, you don't have to have seen or to have been there in the scene. Just an explanation of what happened and what went through. For example, if you hear somebody shot themselves, that will give you some kind of image of how it could have happened. And sometimes also maybe when the details are explained, this is how they were, this is how I found them, maybe they were hanging or something like that. You have a visual image that you create within yourself of the explanation that is being given. And therefore, you also have the intrusive thoughts. And these are just to say that you're undergoing through a trauma. Some people will fear why they're having these intrusive thoughts. Some people will see like they feel like they're being haunted by this person because of having these intrusive thoughts. The first thing is to create a meaning out of them and to know that I am having this kind of thoughts, I'm having this kind of images because I am going through a grief moment. And it is something that I have to work through, okay? So this is a very normal state, but you need to go through it. The other thing is to repair the mourner's assumptive world. Now, what do we mean by assumptive world? The assumptive world are things that we take for granted or things that we believe in, either about ourselves, about people around us, or the world. What does that mean? What it means is, for example, if I had a relationship with someone, there are things that I believe they cannot do. They have not proven or done anything. Like you can have just a relationship with someone and you trust them enough to believe they cannot cheat on you. Not that you have any evidence to that or anything that you hold to that, but you just know they cannot cheat on you because of the relationship that you have had. That is part of your assumptive world because you take that assumption. You can also have an assumptive world where you can say, I cannot trust this person. So it can either be positive or negative. This is not a person who can be trusted. Maybe somebody just walks in your workplace and all of a sudden you find looking at whether everything is okay or things have been taken. That means in your assumptive world, that looks like someone who can steal. So what happens when we have somebody who has died out of suicide? The first thing is that your assumptive world about them is affected. I would like to give an example of if, for example, a parent lost their son or lost their daughter through suicide. The first thing you ask yourself is whether you really knew them, whether you had real knowledge about them, because you would think like this is not what I would have expected them to do. This is not something that was there and I would think of them doing it. So they kind of get you by surprise. What that means is that your assumptive world has been violated. And you're left now with the task of knowing whether you really knew the person or not. One important thing then to do about this, and you are repairing the assumptive world, is creating a narrative that about this person, because we always have a narrative about ourselves, we have a narrative about other people, we have a narrative about the world, so to say. So the person who now we are calling the survivor has got to create a narrative within them that would accommodate the fact that this person could have done what they did to commit suicide. And it is important to note that if, for example, this is a family member, all the family members will not have the same assumptive world or the same narrative. What is important is that they form a narrative that suits them, a narrative that goes well with their assumptive world. So the fact that we might have different kind of narratives, the fact that we might have different ways of understanding and making sense of what happened in the family should not make us have a tension, so long as it makes sense to the person who is holding that narrative. And so long as it is also a narrative that would help them to develop a good assumptive world and come also to come to terms with what happened. So it is not a narrative that would lead to the person denying what happened or blaming another person who is not to be blamed for what happened, but a narrative that would create sense of what happened, that would create a better meaning of what happened, and that would support growth at the end of the day. Okay, this narrative should also help us to accept our blind spots, that there are some things we could not see. I think this is something that one just has to accept because of the sense of guilt. You see, I had a blind spot. I could not see it. I could not see it coming, and I cannot blame myself for not seeing it coming, because we're also limited in what we can do, how much we can understand about the other person. And just knowing that I had a blind spot and that is it, and coming to terms with that is so important, because once I have accepted that, and I have accepted that there is not much that I could not do about it, then I am ready to start growing out of this mourning that we have of the assumptive world. Now, another one is self-dosing and creating psychological sanctuary to the relief of pain. So what we are saying is, mourning in itself is painful. It is a painful process. And we all have to find ways of getting ourselves through the pain. That is just given. However, when it comes to suicide, the pain of losing someone through suicide becomes even more painful. Okay, and therefore, being exposed to suicide in itself will cause more psychological pain to the people who are around them. And one of the things is, how do I deal with this pain? And how do I deal with this pain in a healthy way, that, you know, I don't increase the risk of myself committing suicide? Because if I don't deal with the pain well, then what would happen is that I might also find myself committing suicide. So do I turn off to my spirituality, for example, to deal with the pain? Or does my spirituality help me? Do I go and seek help from a profession to deal with the pain? Some people would be helped by meditation and other ways of mindedness that would help them to overcome the pain. So the issue here is, what helps you to overcome the pain in a healthy way? And everybody will have different ways of overcoming this pain. There is no given way of doing it. However, we would discourage medication a lot, unless maybe you have been diagnosed with a condition like depression and all that, to help you come out of the depression. But it is not the idea of making you not feel the pain, but go through the pain in a healthy way. Now, when it comes to the pain of mourning or the pain of loss, and especially when someone dies, literature that is being produced is showing that there are two things that you have to go through, or two processes that you have to go through. And someone keeps oscillating between these two processes as you go through the mourning process, all right? So these two processes are, one, you have to go through the mourning of this person, okay? Or through the loss orientation. We call it loss orientation. And the second one is restoration orientation. Now, let me just go through this very slowly for us to understand. When you're talking about loss orientation, it means that we have to come into terms with the loss. We have to go through the painful processes. We have to go through the emotional processes of having lost someone and coming into terms with this loss, kind of getting in and meshed into this loss, okay? And feeling the loss fully, so to say. So it is like going through the emotional processes of the loss. The restoration process just means that sometimes, even with this emotional process, we have to keep our emotions aside and do what we have to do. Let me just give a few examples of this. Take that the person who committed the suicide is across maybe a spouse, and you had joined property. And of course, we know from our cultural background and also from our experience and things that we have had, when someone passes on and they were your spouse, you might want to take care of the property, not to be taken away. So much as you're going through the painful process of this mourning And that is what we are calling loss orientation. You have at times to keep these things, the emotions aside, and make sure that you are also working not to lose property, not to lose what you had. And that is what you are calling restoration process. The other example is even when you're planning for the burial, and maybe the common thing that we have is having a committee, people coming to help you through the burial process and all that. Much as you're going through the pain, when you're going through these arrangements and you're going through what to do and what not to do, you have to keep those emotions aside first and work on what you have to do in order for this person to be laid to rest. So these two processes, actually, we oscillate in them, and they are very spontaneous. Both of them move together. Much as we have time to go through the loss process and accept the loss and that very painful experience, there are also times that you have to keep that aside and do what we have to do. All right. So it doesn't mean that if a member of the family could be very good in the restoration process, but maybe when it comes to the planning of the burial, they are very good. They are knowing the sites. They are going to pay for everything, taking care of all the bills and all that. It doesn't mean that the loss orientation is not there. It just means that they have put these two into compartments and they're doing the two of them. So some members will be better at this in the family than others. Sometimes you are forced to go through the restoration process because of the surrounding. So maybe relatives might be blaming you for the death. People around you might be blaming you for the death. And therefore, you have to go through the restoration process just to make sure that life will also continue as normal even after this death. All right. Then the other one is development of social management skills. Now, suicide affects the way we socialize. Even as people who have been left behind, our socialization changes. Now, it make recall of some skills, coping skills or social skills that we were not using before, or that we were rarely using before. Why? Because there has been changes in the close relationship because of what has just happened, because of the suicide that has happened. I'll give an example of maybe a couple who lose their child. And because we have different orientations towards how we cope with mourning, maybe the mother might want to talk more about it, might want to maybe process the death through sharing. But the father of this child might want to withdraw, or might want not to talk much about it. So what happens then is that you have to find now a way of coping and a way of maintaining these relationships. So what this also means is that the loss of a person through suicide might also affect other relationships. And we have to be very aware of this. So for example, it might cause people to divorce as they mourn, all right? Because then maybe the way we used to socialize is not the same. It might bring about a lot of family conflict because, as Nancy pointed out before, some people might want to blame someone in the family, or some people might want to blame someone within the society, and therefore socializing with them might change. Of course, not also forgetting that people might isolate you, or people might have some might put you aside for a person maybe close to you having committed suicide, right? Now, the other one is repair of the relationship with the deceased. These are very interesting ones. Now, I don't know how much we agree with this. Maybe I can give people a moment to just respond. You can either respond by talking, there is no problem, or you can respond by giving a message. That death ends relationships between two people. Like when someone dies and you had a relationship with them, it means the relationship is also dead. How much do you agree with this statement? Maybe I would give that a few people to respond to that. I saw Mr. Nderi somewhere.
Yes, yeah, I am.
Yes, yes. How much would you agree with this statement that death ends relationship between two people?
I think I agree with that because I had an experience with the loss of my mother recently, like 2 weeks ago. I think I had a lot of questions and couldn't find some answers, but I think there's that, yeah, I guess the relationship, because now I was wondering, where do I begin? Is it with my siblings, or how do I continue that relationship? Or is it true? Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Helen Macharia seems to disagree with that.
Yes, I recently lost my husband. And the relationship endures because there are so many things you have worked together in this thing, and there are so many reminders. And I think the relationship is there. It's only changes in character that the person is not there. But he's very much there in my life. And yeah. So the relationship is very much there.
All right, thank you so much. There is also Ambui Kimadi who also has given a comment. Maybe I give Ambui Kimadi a chance. Yes, Ambui?
Yes, I would go with the same thought. I think the relationship changes, the dynamics change, but the connection is still present because the attachment is still there. Yeah.
In some way.
In some way, it's still there.
All right. Thank you very much, Wambui. You see, this has been a long thing that has been debated in cycles, especially in psychiatry and also in psychology. That it has been taken that when somebody dies, we have to cut the attachment, or we have to cut the relationship with them, and therefore maintaining a relationship with them or maintaining an attachment with them has been taken to be pathological. But you know, you don't want to get to end this relationship. But modern literature about mourning and especially death, not only by suicide, but any kind of death, has shown that in almost all human cultures, there is an allowance that you have been given, or it is allowed to continue some certain bonds with the deceased person. Let me just take it, for example, when we talk about our African way of thinking. When you talk about our way of thinking, we have people whom we call the living dead. What does that mean? Though they are dead, they're still living within us in a way. And they either are living within us through what they did. We still remember them through their action. We still remember them what they fought for. You know, like now I saw recently people talking about Wangari Maathai and remembering that she died in this month and all the things that she did. And therefore, though she's dead, through her actions, she's still living within us. Okay, that she was the first woman to win a Nobel Prize because of her efforts. You see, though she's not within us physically, we still maintain a certain relationship with her that is either a psychological or a spiritual way of relating with them. Now, this is what we are also saying here. How do we, first, through suicide, there was a relationship was spoiled. You know, we get angry with this person. Why did they have to do that? And one of the questions that many people will ask is, wasn't the relationship I had with them enough for them to make a different kind of decision? I mean, couldn't he have, maybe he or she have shared with me, or couldn't he or she have found it that don't do that to me? I mean, what made them do that? So the question here would always be, wasn't our relationship enough for this person to change their mind? And that is what even makes it more difficult, okay? So, so what we are saying here is that current literature is saying that people maintain a certain relationship. It's only the form of relationship that changes when somebody dies. So here what we are saying is, for this relationship then to change its form, the mourner has got to come into terms with the fact that this relationship also needs to be repaired. Could you, for example, in more specific terms, could you, for example, forgive the person for having made the decision that they made? All right. Could you just let go of that decision? Could you let go of the fact that you have a feeling of betrayal, that they could have done this even without telling me or even without involving me? Though they betrayed me, but I can forgive them so that we can continue with our life, and I have a better place, a better way of placing them, other than looking at them as those people who betrayed me or those people who did not do this or that. So the repairing of the relationship is quite important to help the person who has been left behind be able to move on, be able to move on with life, be able to continue making meaning about life. I think this is one of the most difficult tasks that we have to go through. I remember some few years back, I had a parent whose son had committed suicide, and you know, the spouse had just said something to the son, which they had kept secret for a long time. So he decided to commit suicide that very day. So what this man was asking was, couldn't he have waited for me and asked me about this secret, and I would maybe have explained it more and tell him why we had kept it for such a long time. And he got very annoyed with his son because he had also taken this son to one of the best universities and a very expensive university, so to say. And yet, despite spending a lot of money on him and his education and investing a lot on his education, he still decided to commit suicide. It was very difficult for him to let go of this. And he felt like, you know, he would have rather have told him so that he doesn't have to pay all these fees and he doesn't have to invest a lot in this young man. So these are things that we need to start repairing our relationship, start letting go in our relationship. Kind of just know that we still, though the relationship is not physical, but somehow it's spiritually and psychologically, we are in a certain relationship with these particular persons, and we need to repair that relationship with them. Okay, so we are working towards transforming the nature of relationship and attachment. So, and that is what we are saying, that it will still remain either as psychological or spiritual. All right. Then the other task that we have to do is forming a durable biography of the deceased. Now, see, whenever somebody dies, we have to create a story about it and kind of remember things that they did. What shall we remember them for? How shall we, what do we want to create a story about them? And especially also about their death and all that. So normally what happens is people create this story and they live with it. Now, once you live with this story, it is not only you who has got their story, but also the community around kind of participates in this. And so it becomes this story that we are creating, or the narrative that we are having, becomes also a way of the community joining up in your mourning, so that you're not mourning alone. So that's why you find, for example, during burials, people will come and give stories about this person. They were very kind, they were very good people. They helped me this or that. They helped me here, they helped there. He was a very good person. If they're presenters, they were used to present very well. If they were doctors, they used to treat us very well. You remember Just to remind you the recent case of the doctor in Nakuru. People are saying how he used to be good, how he used to treat his patients. So this is a story that you would like to remain. And this is the story that you would like to carry on with the memories of this person. So then the community kind of creates a story that they would also like to remain with. Now, when it comes to suicide, this becomes difficult. One, either it becomes a taboo to share about their stories with other people. You know, like you want to talk about him positively, but people are saying, no, don't talk about him. Don't talk about what happened. Because sometimes we think that when we talk about him, we're also talking about what happened. All right. So it becomes quite difficult to talk about it. The other thing is that we could be the narrative that we have about this person who has passed on could be limited to how they died. The narrative that we hold could only be a narrative of the nature of death that they surrounded them. So, for example, I know one person who died near where I live. And what he did is he took his father's car, sorry, after going to America, and he connected the exhausts to a pipe and put it in the car. Then somehow shut all the windows and doors. Then went in a field, and in the middle of the field, just parked the car there. So he just stayed there. And after some time, people started wondering what the car is doing there. And this person has stayed in for so long. So they went only to find that he's dead. Of course, he killed himself in that way. But looking closer to that, people kind of remember how when you talk about him, the narrative that people will have is the narrative of the mood of death and how he did it and how he committed the suicide. And the whole memory of this person stays around that particular event. So this is one thing that now you see, how do you create a biography of this person that is healthy, that will create more meaning? Was there something positive about him apart from the death, apart from the mood of death? What else can we remember about him? I think this is made also worse because of the stigma that surrounds the person who has died. And because you see, when for example, even the person who came to bury talked a lot about suicide and talked about how it is wrong to do this, what they did was wrong, and how it was sinful, for example. You know, like you would remember that. You would remember it was an act that was not good. It was an act that should not have been happening. And that becomes even harder for you to start thinking about the positive things that this person might have done, or positive memories of this person that needs to be there. So there's need for an extra effort in this case then to share more positive memories, to update and highlight them. Even when you have anniversaries, like 1 year anniversary after the death, there is need not just to talk about the nature of death, but also to talk about other things that this person did that were positive, how they impacted other people's life positively. There is that need. And not only is there a need, but there is also an extra effort that should be made for that to happen, because naturally we kind of tend to think about their nature of death. The death. There is always an ultimate blame for death. If somebody, for example, died of cancer, we would say that, you know, he battled with cancer. So we are saying he did not want to die, but he lost in the fight of cancer. And therefore, cancer becomes the ultimate blame for his death, or the ultimate explanation for his death. If somebody had an accident we would say, all right, so he did not know about this, but the accident happened and he was hit. Maybe the chest was hit and there was a lot of damage. So whatever hit him now becomes the ultimate blame for the death. Now, in the case of a suicide, even if we say he was battling with this, do we say he gave up? Or do we say she gave up? Do we say she succumbed to this? What we blame as, what do we say is the ultimate cause of death? And the ultimate cause of death also becomes part of the narrative that we give about this person. And especially when we talk about matters surrounding their death. So it becomes kind of difficult to say what was this person or what drove this person to death. And therefore, it is also important as we make a biography of this person or we make a narrative of this person to avoid the sense of guilt, to avoid blaming yourself as the ultimate cause of death, or even to stop blaming other people as the ultimate cause of death. Of course, more and more studies are showing that it is not natural for someone just to kill themselves. Naturally, we would like to preserve our lives. Naturally, we run away from anything that threatens our life. So when somebody decides to go the other way, it means that they had a lot of pain. And that pain now becomes like what we would call the ultimate cause of death, is that they were struggling with a pain that was within them, a more of a psychological pain than a more of a physical pain. I know people who mutilate themselves. I know people who, recently I met somebody who had cut off their fingers and their toes, cut 2 fingers, 3 toes, because of the psychological pain. So if somebody can go through such a pain, then it can easily explain why somebody would also take their life away. So it is about finding a deeper meaning of this death. What would we say is the ultimate cause of death? And this is a task that every person who has been left behind has to go through. Now, the last thing is the living a new life or reinvest in a new life. Now, mourning of any kind, the last step is always finding a new meaning of life. If you lost someone closer to you, you have to start learning to live without the physical presence of that person, and actually making a new meaning in life without that person's presence, or at least physical presence. Okay? When it comes to death through suicide, we are saying it can cause a lot of pain and therefore make the survivors lack a meaning in life. Like saying, if I could not support that person, if I was not there for them, then is this life worth living? So one of the tasks of the survivor is to make a new meaning in life. Learn to live without this person around. Learn to come into terms with what happens and then continue with life. As you can see, this is like the last part when it comes to the mourning process. However, it is not always a straight line from what we said as the first task to the last task. Sometimes you find yourself oscillating, going backward and forward, backward and forward. This is very normal for people who are going through this kind of grief. However, they have to survive, they have to make choices. The survivors who have been left behind, they have to make choices. You have to make choices of how your life is going to be. You have to make choices of how now you will be contented that this person has left. Okay? You have to be contented with the reunion with the deceased person. And I think the most important thing is knowing that some questions cannot be answered. For example, I have to be contented with the fact that if somebody commits suicide, the only person who can really tell us the reason for committing that suicide is that person who committed it. So we'll never know exactly what made them commit suicide. If, for example, I'm questioning why they did not tell us, you see, the only person who can fully answer that question is the person who did not say it. Unfortunately, when it comes to suicide, he's no longer there. So I have to be contented with the fact that all the answers I will not get. And I have to live without these answers. So the major thing is to move on with life instead of looking for answers to questions that might never fully be answered. So how do you move on with life and become contented with that? How do you move on with life knowing that I'll never know all the facts that surrounded the death of this particular person? I think that is the most important thing when it comes to reinvestment. Instead of putting a lot of energy and a lot of your emotional investment in trying to find out things that you'll never find out in this person, how can you close that chapter and then move on with your own life? This is one of the tasks that is most difficult when it comes to the survivors of grief, or those people who are left behind after the person has committed suicide. Okay, and of course, this is what reaching here is what causes a lot of psychological distress, and the only way to overcome this is just to know that this has happened. Come to accepting this, come to accepting the dilemmas that cannot be resolved, and then move on with life. All right. I think at this point, I would like to take, if there are any questions, we can take any questions. I think I and Nancy would be ready to answer. All right. I think I would be ready to respond to any questions, even those that you can either send them through the chat, or you can also just directly ask the questions that you might have. There could be also questions or comments.
Hello.
Hello.
I would like to ask a question. It's just something I'm sitting with and thinking about after listening through. Do you think that the fact that, okay, not the fact really, do you think that it's entitlement to people's experiences or people's lives that comes out as our lack of acceptance that they actually chose to commit suicide? Because if someone really had felt that they lived their best life and they were already done being here, they feel they have served the purpose they wanted to serve by being here, and they decided to commit suicide, right? So if they committed suicide in that dynamic, and I, as a person in their life, probably as a friend or a lover or a parent or a sibling, I cannot accept that because I wanted them in my life. I wanted them to continue living. Is it a form of entitlement to that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think yes, there is I would agree there is a form of entitlement. We all feel we are entitled to maybe having a reason of why the person died. There's also that entitlement of saying they could have told you, they could have said it, they could have done this. Was I not as important as to this person's life? Why did they have to do that to us or to me as a person? So yes, there is that feeling of I was entitled to this, but I was denied it. The only thing is that it is very debatable today whether somebody really wills to commit suicide or not. That is very debatable today. And even if really there is anybody who would like to take committing suicide as I was satisfied with life. Now it has come to an end. I peacefully go away. I think the very few people, that is very debatable. But literature seems to show that if there has been suicide, there was some sort of pain. And that pain was so intense that the person could not just take it anymore. So that, yes, there is that entitlement, but again, that entitlement, we have to come into terms with saying, though I was entitled to this, I cannot now get it because the person who would have given me this is no longer there to give it to me. For example, the person who was supposed to give me an explanation of this death is already dead because they're the only one who could have given it. And so therefore, with entitlement also, remember there's some, when it comes to entitlement, at some point, there are things that we are entitled to and we shall never get them. And the best thing to do with that is to consider that entitlement as a bad debt. A bad debt just means a debt that will never be paid. So in this case, I think, yes, but the best way to deal with it is consider it as a debt that the person cannot now pay since it's no longer there. I don't know whether I've answered your question, Wambui.
Yes, I feel you have understood my point, and thank you for your input.
Okay, thanks a lot. I see in the chats here, there is somebody who has asked. The information is very useful. I'm not getting this one. The information is very useful, but my question is, what are ways that survivors can use to be able to move on? Because that's the hardest part of grief. Yes, I think, yes, the hardest part of grief is that one. And you can see, we have even put it here as the 7th one, the reinvestment in living. It is the hardest task. And I agree with you, there is no straight answer to this. I think that we have to let everyone go through the grieving process. We have to let them come into terms. But most of all, we have to think about what do you need maybe just to let go, and what can be answered and what cannot be answered. What can be helpful for you not just to keep holding on to, so as that you continue also living. What are some of the beliefs, maybe some of the beliefs that you had about this person that maybe you need to change, and change in a positive way? So I think those are the most important things that we need to look at when we're talking about people going through the grieving process. Okay, and especially we talk about not repairing the relationship. I think that is something that we need to work on more when it comes to grief. And also the assumptive world. Yes, the assumptive world. The assumptive world is something that we need to think about more, because I think that is what makes people have a lot of, getting stuck. That I never thought this person would do this. I never thought this would happen. For example, people talk about, I never thought that this would happen in our family. All right. I never thought this would take place. I never thought maybe my brother, my sister would do this. I never thought my husband, my wife would resort to this. So that assumptive world is something else that we can help mourners to get through with. All right. And just to point out, these are very good questions, because this actually, our presentation today was meant for two people. One are the people who maybe are going through this experience and experiencing this kind of task that they have to go through. But you could also be having someone that is going through the process, and maybe you might not know, how do I help them to go through the process? The idea here is to let them go through the process. As you said, there is no quick fix in that I can tell you go and do this 1, 2, 3, 4. I think the idea is to move along with this particular person in their own path. Some people will take longer, some people will take shorter. If they are family members, there's family members who recover faster, depending on their relationship they had with this particular person, depending on what they witnessed, the story they had, when they had it, also depending on one personality from one personality to another. So yes, these are some things that will determine, and therefore we have also to consider when we are working with people going through the grieving process. I don't know whether I have answered that. Maybe the person can say whether I have answered well. I think we have touched, I'm looking through some of the expectations that you had. Meanwhile, if somebody has a question, you still feel free to ask. This is your time. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Shifa. Thank you. Thank you, Samuel. Now, there's somebody who was talking about self-blame, not seeing it coming through counseling. I think that we have talked more about that, and we have said we have to think about the blind spots and come into terms with the fact that we had blind spots. Okay. Is it ethical for psychologists to approach a person he or she identifies as having depression instead of waiting for the person to voluntarily approach the therapist? My idea here is this. With my experience, sometimes people might not be ready to come for therapy. We can give them suggestions. We can just point out to them that there is something that you need help, and then leave them to make their choices. We cannot make choices for people as therapists and as psychologists, but we can increase awareness. It is the same case of suicide. Like if somebody tells me they have suicidal ideations, I get very much concerned, but sometimes they withdraw, they move away from me. I try to reach out. I try to ask them, are you okay? Is everything all right? You seem to be withdrawing. I can only make them aware of that, but I cannot make them come for the sessions. So we can give a suggestion, we can create awareness, but the ultimate decision is with this particular person. So we cannot force them to come to therapy, but we can give the suggestion. And especially when it comes to psychological conditions, and also when it comes to suicide. Now, of course, it also depends on the level of depression you're talking about, because remember, when it comes to those who are psychologists here in this forum will also agree with me. When it comes to mental illnesses, there is a level where now we cannot talk about the autonomy of the sick person, because they are too sick also to make a decision. Okay, so if depression is very deep, it might have reached somewhere where now we cannot trust on them to make the decision, but somebody else has to make the decision for them to start off treatment. And then at some point when they're not as sick as they were before, they can either decide to continue with the treatment or not. Okay, so some of these mental conditions also, the ethical dimensions will change depending on what condition you're talking about and how it affects the person's reasoning. What is the role of society in stopping, preventing suicide, especially by the youth? And what could be contributing to the increase of suicide cases, and especially among the youth? I think when, especially among the youth, there are a lot of triggers nowadays. Triggers would include what we call the influences in life. There are so many things that are influencing us in life. There is social media, which is coming up, influencing us a lot. There is lack of balance in life, where people have so many things that are going on in their life, so they cannot concentrate on one thing. I was talking to someone yesterday who is a social worker who was involved in cases of suicide among older people, and she had very interesting results that she was sharing with me, that older people in urban areas seem to be more depressed than older people in rural areas. And I was thinking maybe in rural areas they had no one to take care of, but the idea was that from that study which they did as an organization, I would not like to say which organization because these are still to be published. They are still to publish their results. But it was interesting how they found that in urban areas, one of the reasons why people are more depressed is that they have to pay for everything. They have to pay for food, they have to pay for house rent, they have to pay, some even reported they have to pay to go to the toilet, they have to pay for water that they drink. Someone reported that even in some areas, in the urban areas, even being seen walking around as an older person, somehow you have to pay for that. So they felt like the burden is too much on them. And this has got a ripple effect. For example, if I'm a parent having a youthful person, and I feel that economically I'm pressed, you see, it would mean that maybe this youth will not have his education, will not have the privileges they had, will not have so many things will not happen to them. And this increases the chances of having depression and having other mental illnesses. So I think the changes that we are going through within the society are so many and very intense that if we don't take care, some people will commit suicide among us, and especially the youth. I think the other thing that really we have also to look at is the human connections that we have. Slowly by slowly, we are keeping losing these connections that we used to have. I'll give an example of myself. When I was growing up, probably I knew my uncles, we would go and visit and all that. But I also knew as a young boy, even in my adolescence, I knew that my neighbors are very concerned about me. They would stop me, ask me how is school, when did you close, were you sent away or did you close school? And we were making fun of it the other day that even when we used to sneak out of school and these old women greet you, you had to respond. Because if you don't, they come to the school and report that I greeted a young man and this man did not respond. And then they're told to identify. And funny enough, these old women never got it wrong. They will support you. So you knew somehow that society supports you. You knew that if I have a problem, I can talk to maybe an elder there, I can talk to my dad's friend, I can talk to someone else there. So that I knew that there was a lot of support from the community around. But slowly by slowly, we are losing that. There seems to be a lot of isolation. Sometimes you also don't know what is happening to the other person. So I think, yeah, the society as a society, we have to look back and see where are we losing it in terms of supporting one another? Where are we not, what do we need to go back to in terms of supporting one another? And also because we also have to admit there are a lot of changes that have happened. The other day I was involved in an interview with a certain man who was saying, we need to go back to our traditional ways of doing things where maybe children would sit around a fire. My argument for that was, you see, the reason you are sitting around a fire is because first, your grandfather was available. Two, you're in the rural setting, so everyone was around. Now you're in the urban setting. You know, people have moved away. That grandfather is not there. He's in the rural areas. You're here in the urban setting. You don't have common stories. I mean, because of our backgrounds. And maybe even if you told maybe your father or someone else to give you a similar story, they may not know it. So I was saying we need to look for a way as a society whereby supporting each other, supporting our children, supporting the youth, supporting the elderly becomes a social responsibility, that we can take care of each other and that we can increasingly get concerned about what is happening to the other person. All right. So that is how I would look at it. Increased, I think I have talked about increased suicide, ways in which homicide, suicide, especially for lovers, can be controlled. Yeah, I think with more closer relationship, with more understanding of each other, yes, we can help to control these conditions. How to help in suicide cases, I think we have dealt with that. Dealing with traumatic events, I think we have mentioned that when it comes to containment of trauma. how we can help those who have been affected by suicide in terms of stigma prevention. I think we have also talked about that when it comes to social and how your social life changes, okay? Tactics in handling, I think we have had a lot of those. How to maintain contact with people. Yeah, I think in my explanation, I mentioned that. How to help secondary victims, yes. How to overcome suicide thoughts. I think that I might dwell with a little bit, how to overcome suicidal thoughts. That is something that we need we need to start talking more about. That people who commit suicide do not just wake up one day and commit suicide. They had had suicidal ideation for some time. They had thought about it. And one of the things that has been reported mostly by people who have committed suicide, who have attempted suicide more than once, twice, or something like that, is that one of the things that keeps them away is the fear of, I will die when I do that. That means I will die, that fear of the unknown, what happens to me when I'm dead. I have had young people who told me that the only reason that they are alive is because they think of how much pain they would cause to others, but the suicidal thoughts are there. So one of the things is share these suicidal thoughts. Also look at the underlying issues. Not just the suicidal thoughts, but what is it about my life that would make me have such thoughts? And try to resolve those underlying issues. Try to see, are there people in my life that have hurt me and I have not dealt with that hurt? Deal with the hurt. Help, make sure that you take responsibility of your life. Learn the social skills that need to be learned so that you become a better person. And especially think more about your psychological well-being, or what we call about your mental health. Maintain, just as we maintain physical health, also think about your mental health, your stressors in life. If you have underlying conditions that would more lead to stress, like for example, if you have a depression, treat the depression, because depression could lead to more suicidal ideations. Sometimes, yes, we might help through cognitive therapy. We don't refuse that. But again, you see, with depression, more treatment is needed. So if there is treatment that should be given, just make sure that you have that kind of treatment that is supposed to be given. As waiting to see the presentation, how can we help people around us who are suffering from depression? I think I've just mentioned that. Bring more awareness, help them to realize that depression is a condition like any other. Also help them to realize that having depression doesn't mean that you have more problems than others in life. Okay, some of this has been proven to be done across families, that there is some genetics in it, that some personalities would handle more stress than others. So there are people who are more prone to depression than others. So helping them just to understand that, and that mental illness is an illness like any other. You don't need to stigmatize it. You don't have to look at it negatively, but you can be helped. Okay, and just like anybody who has malaria, has typhoid, has COVID, goes to hospital, you can also go to hospital and be treated for a mental illness. Many facts about suicide tendencies and patterns. I think we have mentioned some of those, but suicide patterns and tendencies is definitely something that we can think about in our next webinar. What to see symptoms of people who are suicidal. And also I think we can also talk more about suicidal ideations in our next webinar.